I call this meeting to order. This is the 26th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. I want to welcome our guests here tonight and thank them so much for coming in on fairly short notice, and especially for attending the night session of the Standing Committee. We are televised, ladies and gentlemen, and pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, October 17, 2011, this is our study of Bill C-13, an act to implement certain provisions of the 2011 budget as updated on June 6, 2011, and other measures. We have 5 organizations represented at this panel. We have, first of all, the Calvert Home Mortgage Investment Corporation. We have the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We have the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting, the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. You will have each maximum of 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we'll have questions from members. And we'll begin with Mr. Kohler, please.
Thank you very much. Monsieur le Président and ladies and gentlemen of the Finance Committee, good evening. C'est un grand plaisir de vous adresser aujourd'hui.
It's a great pleasure to be here to you.
About a matter that affects many honest Canadians, not just business people, but also the thousands of people who rely on the specialized services of mortgage investment corporations. A mortgage investment corporation, known as a MIC, is a business structure created by an Act of Parliament in 1975 to increase investment in the mortgage sector and to make home ownership more accessible to Canadians. MIC shares have been eligible for registered accounts, RSPs, and RIFs since their creation. The Income Tax Act outlines stringent criteria to maintain eligibility as a MIC, and among the rules are an ownership limit of 25% as a shareholder, and related parties counted together in this 25% include a spouse and minor children. The current ownership rules were legislated into the Income Tax Act in the late 1990s as a result of a comprehensive review of MICs by the Department of Finance. The rules were implemented with a 10-year penalty-free window for MICs to fall into compliance. MICs represent a legitimate form of lending that was conceived of by people like yourself. MICs were an excellent idea, and they continue to fulfill the purpose for which they were designed. However, changes to the rules governing registered accounts represented by Bill C-13 will have the effect of moving MIC shareholders into illegitimate and prohibited territory. Now, we understand the intent behind many of the changes, which is to address inappropriate tax planning schemes. And these kinds of schemes do no favors for legitimate lending businesses like ours, and we applaud the government for the priority it places on tightening up the rules. Bill C-13 accomplishes this in many ways. However, in our view, it goes far beyond its therapeutic intent, and what should be a surgical instrument aimed at a troublesome issue appears to be more like a sledgehammer that threatens healthy tissue over a much wider area. Bill C-13 will, in effect, change the way the government has regarded MICs for more than 35 years. It will effectively limit ownership to 10% for the owner to maintain registered account eligibility of the shares. In addition to the ownership limit being reduced by 15%, those counted together in this maximum is expanded from spouse and minor children to include any blood, marital, or adoptive relative. All of this may sound benign or harmless, but from the point of view of those who operate a MIC, the short-term effect will be harsh, punitive taxes. The long-term effect may be the collapse of many businesses across the country and possibly financial ruin. Those who exceed the 10% ownership cap, together with their relatives, people who are all along in compliance with the Income Tax Act previously, will have their RSP and RIF taxed in the current year and every year until 2022, and at that point, if the shares are still in their registered account, they will have their entire income confiscated with a 100% tax rate. As you can see, law-abiding business people will be hurt, but more importantly, so will the thousands of Canadians who hold shares in these companies. Who are these shareholders? A teacher, a farmer, a shopkeeper, a retiree. Together with the managers of the company, we, the affected shareholders, will have to deregister our retirement savings. For the remaining shareholders, they may also suffer a penalty in the value of a company which must restructure in order to comply with the change in policy. My company is a small business. We have only one office with 8 employees. We've operated as a lender since 1982 and currently have $26 million invested in mortgages. Most other MICs are equally small, and yet together as an industry, we represent over $1 billion and hundreds of MICs across Ontario, BC, and Alberta alone. The contribution to the economy is significant across the entire country. We grant mortgages to builders and renovators who employ carpet layers and plumbers, and many of these borrowers would be hard-pressed to find the financing they need through institutional lenders. We work with borrowers in small communities or rural communities where institutions may not be able to help them. What we finance directly fuels jobs, fuels economic opportunity, builds communities, and helps support entrepreneurs and small industry in Canada. We ask for the opportunity to keep these dollars working in an economy that desperately needs our nurturing, and we commit to continue to work hard to invest wisely to support that growth. In conclusion, I ask that you please remove the sections of Bill C-13 that apply to MICs. I understand your need to close inappropriate tax planning schemes. We have suggestions to help you prevent schemes without negative effects on the MIC industry. We can help you make this work more fairly. I would be at your disposal if I can help in any way. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you, and thank you for the leadership and service in your work as members of our federal parliament. Merci.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Ms. Ng.
Thank you very much. I represent CARP, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with 350,000 members across the country and 50 chapters. We advocate for public policy change that improves the quality of life for all Canadians as we age. Health care remains a top priority for our members, like it is for all Canadians, but it matters more as we age, despite the fact that today's generation of older Canadians are living longer, healthier lives. The Canadian healthcare system serves Canadians very well for acute care, but it's not mandated to provide continuing care for those with chronic diseases, for which medicine has no cure. That responsibility falls to informal caregivers and the home care sector, which is at best a patchwork across the country. CARP's particular focus today is on Section 23 of Bill 13, which provides for a non-refundable caregiver tax credit. CARP is recommending that the tax credit be made refundable, an increase in amount, and target those who provide the heaviest care, and possibly within the same funding envelope. The vast majority of Canadians want to stay in their own homes as long as possible, even if they have medical challenges. Not only does this improve their health outcomes, but keeps them among their friends and family, all of which adds to their quality of life. This good social and health policy is also good fiscal policy. A well-integrated and successful home care strategy has the potential of diverting massive amounts of demand from the formal health care system. It's estimated that home care is 40 to 75% less expensive than institutional care. Finally, not only is a comprehensive home care and caregiver support strategy good public policy, it is also good political sense. CARP polls its members regularly on our advocacy proposals, and they consistently rank caregiver support as a top priority. They were appreciative of the attention given to the role of family caregivers in the recent federal and provincial elections. They appreciated the acknowledgement of family caregivers with the specific non-refundable tax credit proposed and now passed in the recent budget, but they preferred the refundable tax credit or allowance proposed in the other platforms. In the CARP poll last week, 50% of those polled thought that the best way to support caregivers was through an allowance or refundable tax credit. The amount that is set forth in the budget, if it was refundable, would be welcomed by the 2.7 million Canadians now providing care to older loved ones. However, there should be a focus on those providing heavy care, those who are most likely to be reducing the hours of work or quitting their jobs altogether to look after a loved one, either permanently or during an acute period. Such people would not benefit from a non-refundable tax credit unless they had other sources of taxable income. Not only should they receive a taxable refundable tax credit, but their amount needs to be increased beyond the $300 resulting from the budget changes. We believe it's possible to limit the budget expenditures for such a measure. 1 in 5 Canadians over 45 is providing care to an older person. That's about 2.7 million Canadians, according to Statistics Canada. Of that 2.7 million caregivers, 25% of them provide heavy care, defined as 30 hours of care a week or more. That brings us down to about 675,000 Canadians. Now, of the 2.7 million caregivers, some 25% are themselves seniors, and 30% of that group, or some 200,000 people, are themselves over 75 years of age. A modest $1,500 per year for 675,000 caregivers would cost about $1 billion a year. Now, there are existing models of caregiver support and allowances here in Canada. Nova Scotia targets low-income families, and they look at the 20-hour threshold of care per week, and they provide up to $4,800 per year. And they budgeted a small amount and would only look after about 375 families. Manitoba has an option as well. But Germany is an interesting example, which has long-term care insurance that provides a significant amount of care to caregivers. I will be able to give you some more specific facts and figures, but suffice it to say that if there was an opportunity to divert a massive amount of care and looking at the differential between home care costs and institutional costs, the potential is anywhere from $4 to $10 billion a year in diverted costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Kaylu, please.
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you very much for allowing us to appear before you this evening. My name is Susan Saint-Amant, and I am chair of the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting. I have run my own small financial services business in Ottawa for the past 22 years now, and prior to that I spent 7 years in management with one of the largest Canadian chartered banks. Our brief provides more information on Kaylu and our sister organization, Advocates, but I want to remind you that over 10,000 of our members are largely self-employed, independent small business owners spread out across Canada. Each one of us advises approximately 300 families, many of whom are owners of small to medium-sized businesses. Like you, we are very concerned about the ability of our business clients to fund their own retirement, the retirement of their employees, while preparing for the succession of their businesses. Although I've not implemented many individual pension plans myself for our clients, I do know they have a very valuable place in our system. When the new IPP rules were first introduced last March, I understood the proposed changes were directed at a small group of business owners who were obtaining unintended tax benefits from their individual pension plans. It appeared that finance was now quite properly dealing with this problem. But then I started getting calls from our members expressing concerns about the general impact of the proposals on the ability of their business clients to participate in defined benefit style pension plans. Based on this feedback, Kaylu formed a working group of members who had expertise in this area. In mid-September, the working group completed its submission to Finance, noting a number of issues and requesting more time for consultation. It appears that Finance was operating under a tight deadline, and Bill C-13 was tabled a mere 2 weeks after the close of the consultation period. Thanks to previous dialogue and input, the final IPP regulations did contain a change designed to mitigate the impact of one of the proposals. However, Kaylu continues to have a fundamental concern with these proposals. We believe the IPP legislation challenges the ability of business owners and key employees to participate in retirement benefit programs with similar terms and conditions available to employees in larger private and even public companies. We see this as a dangerous trend that seems to assume that business owners will abuse employee benefit plans. We don't believe most of our business clients or their professional advisors design plans with the intention of taking advantage of the rules, and we are concerned about this perception and the role it may play as a basis for the development of tax policy. I would now like to invite Kevin to make some specific comments on the legislation that will hopefully illustrate my points.
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Ward.
Thanks, Susan. Mr. Chair, committee, thank you for inviting us tonight. I have to admit, as I reviewed the IPP proposals, I was reminded of a point of discussion with my tax professor at law school. As I struggled to understand the application of a certain tax provision, he told me, remember, there's no equity in tax law. Each word and provision stands by itself and will not bend to the specific facts of a particular situation. In other words, he was telling me that the tax laws will be applied as they are written, even if the result is not fair. Because of this fundamental rule of tax interpretation, I believe it's incumbent on the drafters of such legislation to make sure the rules are not crafted in such a broad manner as to create unfair results. And it is incumbent on organizations such as Kaylu to alert the government of those circumstances where unfairness can arise. I would like to spend the remaining time highlighting some of the unfair impacts of the IPP rules as they relate to the RIF minimum withdrawal requirement.
As you may be aware, typically some members of large defined benefit pension plans have formed corporations as transfer vehicles for the commuted value of their pension benefits. In doing so, they create a pension surplus that is not subject to any withdrawal requirements, creating a tax deferral opportunity. The RIF minimum payout requirement is being imposed on all IPPs in order to minimize this tax deferral opportunity. It bears noting that the specific planning is not being done by small business owners, but by employees who create a fictional employment relationship with a newly incorporated company that has been established for this sole purpose. Yet the RIF minimum rule will apply to any defined benefit plan with less than 4 members, irrespective of how the surplus was created in the plan. We believe the proposals need to be better targeted to prevent the abuse while not impacting other IPPs. It must also be appreciated that these rules apply retroactively to any plan meeting the definition of an IPP. So whether the plan has been created to facilitate the transfer of pension benefits or one that's had the good fortune of being in a surplus position due to strong investment performance, it will be governed by these rules. And not only do these rules operate retroactively, but they can apply to plans that were not previously treated as IPPs simply because one or more of the members have terminated their participation.
Thank you.
Perhaps our biggest concern
Mr.
with
Wark,
the use...
Sorry, we are over time. I do want to get all the witnesses in, and I want to ensure that every member gets a chance to ask questions. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. DeHoog, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is John DeHooge. I sit on the executive of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs and have the pleasure of being the fire chief for your city, City of Ottawa. The Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs is a nonpartisan national association formed in 1908. Our 1,000 members include fire chiefs and other fire chief officers from every Canadian province and territory, and include fire chiefs from Canada's First Nations, industry, airports, seaports, major health care facilities, and Canadian forces. Our National Board of Directors includes the presidents of each provincial and territorial association of fire chiefs. The CFC is in the best position to speak on behalf of all of the elements of the Canadian Fire Service. As part of the budget 2011, the Government of Canada introduced a $3,000 income tax credit for volunteer firefighters who perform more than 200 hours of service in a year. Canada's fire chiefs have been advocating for tax relief for the volunteer fire service since 2003, and the proposal adopted by the Government of Canada in Budget 2011 was the proposal that the CFC had presented to the federal government as our budget priority during last year's pre-budget consultations. In our view, tax relief for Canada's firefighters is a key part of the solution to addressing the recruitment and retention challenges facing Canada's volunteer fire services. We'd like to recognize the government for its commitment to pass this initiative into law, and the CFC appreciated yesterday's exchange in support of the volunteer firefighter tax credit between Ms. Shelley Glover, Member of Parliament for St. Boniface, Manitoba, and the Honourable Jim Flaherty, Minister of Finance. We are also grateful to the work of MPs from all parties who have supported us in our campaign for tax relief for volunteer firefighters. This measure will help with the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters across the country, which will in turn protect Canadians and our communities. Volunteer firefighters are unique even amongst other volunteer emergency first responders. The vast majority of Canadian communities are protected by volunteer firefighters. Of Canada's 3,492 fire departments, more than 91% are volunteer departments, and 4 out of every 5 firefighters are volunteers. In many of Canada's rural and remote communities, volunteer firefighters are the only emergency first responders. In no other emergency responder service do volunteers play such a significant role. As the fire chief for the City of Ottawa, a composite department that includes both career and volunteer firefighters, I can assure you that while they are volunteers in name, their training and the service they provide are highly professional. Volunteer firefighters are trained in the same way as career firefighters. Once recruited, it takes approximately 3 years to properly train a volunteer firefighter, and sadly, many do not stay on past 5 years. The lack of reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses, inadequate equipment and resources, and the time spent away from families and paid employment make it difficult to attract new volunteer firefighters and to keep those already trained. It is worth noting that other volunteer emergency responders plan or choose when they want to volunteer, whereas volunteer firefighters are often on call all the time. These brave men and women leave their full-time jobs to attend emergencies, losing wages and incurring personal costs in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. MacDonald, please.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank the Finance Committee for their invitation to speak today. My name is David MacDonald. I'm an economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, a nonpartisan economic think tank here in Ottawa. Although the stimulus package is now wound down and the global economic picture appears no more certain as the Great Recession drags on, depression-level unemployment in the U.S. and the European sovereign debt crisis continue. To be sure, the situation looks better here on this side of the Atlantic and north of the 49th parallel. Neither our banks nor our sovereign debt are facing anything similar. In fact, while Euro members like Greece are considering default, the Canadian debt-to-GDP ratio remains the lowest in the G8, equivalent to $500 billion lower than second-place Germany. However, Canadians have not been immune to the global debt crisis. In Canada, it has taken the form of much lower economic growth, higher unemployment, and underemployment. And while middle-class Canadians have not seen the price of their homes collapse, as has been the norm in other countries, they are buried under mountains of debt that will serve as a weight around the economy's neck when interest rates rise. Stagnant real wages for most Canadians over the past several decades has meant that rising prices for houses and everything else were only affordable by piling on more debt. But this Faustian bargain is not likely to continue as household debt to disposable income tops 150%. As private sector forecasters and the Parliamentary Budget Office revise their economic growth projections downward, Canada may well be in year 4 of its own lost decade of high unemployment, widening inequality, and slow growth. 1.5 million Canadians remain unemployed or have simply given up looking for work. To add insult to injury, CIBC has just today released the fact that full-time jobs that are being created are primarily low-paying jobs. And at the same time, as additional demand is needed in the national economy, corporations are cutting back on investment because of uncertainty. They have instead chosen to keep their tax cuts in a bank account, not investing them in new equipment and not creating new jobs. Consumer demand is significantly constrained by high debt loads, and the third actor, the federal government, has chosen not only to withdraw from job creation with the end of the stimulus effort, but to throw likely tens of thousands of public sector workers into unemployment lines through austerity measures. This budget bill contains measures that are much more effective at encouraging capital investment than broad-based corporate tax cuts. Accelerated capital cost allowances for manufacturers and clean energy producers in Part 1 of this bill are examples of tied tax cuts. Corporations only get them if they take specific actions. Similar incentives should be adopted for job creation. Tied tax cuts that are linked to actually creating jobs or investing in machinery are dramatically cheaper and can be much more effective than broad-based tax cuts at getting the desired results. This budget bill should look at expanding tied tax cuts, not just in accelerated capital cost allowances, but also in job creation. While these measures would cost the Treasury, they would cost significantly less than comparably expensive declines in the general corporate tax rate. Given that Canada has the lowest corporate tax rate in the G8, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, we have room to increase that rate by several percentage points while maintaining first place. The additional revenue could provide long-term infrastructure funding for Part 9 of this bill by augmenting the gas tax transfer. Not only would this whittle down the significant infrastructure deficit, but it would drive aggregate demand. Job creation would certainly be a result, but so too would stronger economic growth. If the committee accepts that the federal government was successful in blunting job loss in the crisis of 2008, there is little reason why it couldn't employ similar tactics today. That is, job creation through infrastructure spending. However, employment itself is only part of the problem. This budget bill fails to address rising inequality in Canada. If anything, the children's arts tax credit from Part 1 of this bill will go largely to higher income families and only exacerbate the problem. I encourage the committee to consider measures that might help to reduce instead of increase the after-tax income gap through the introduction of a new income tax bracket above $250,000 in income. The funds raised through this could support stronger social programs that ease the burden of stagnant wages for middle-class Canadians. To conclude, dark clouds remain on the economic horizon, and the changes I've suggested above to this bill will take steps to better protect Canadians against the possibility of another lost decade. I'd like to thank the committee for their time.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacDonald. We'll begin questions from members with Mr. Julian for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for coming this evening. Thank you for coming on very short notice. I'm not going to get all my questions in, but I know my colleagues will be asking them as well. I'd like to start with you, Mr. DeHoge, and thank you very much for coming. The firefighters' income tax credit is important. And you did flag that since 2003, that has been one of the requests that have come forward. Another request that has come forward that is not in Bill C-19 is or C-13 is the issue of the Public Safety Officer Compensation Fund. And as you'll recall, that's been on the agenda now for firefighters' lobbies since 1997. And in 2006, an NDP legislation was brought forward and was adopted by Parliament to create a public safety officer compensation fund that, of course, would include volunteer firefighters who pass away. So I'd be interested if you could speak to the issue of firefighters, particularly volunteer firefighters who pass away in the line of duty. I've spoken with some of their families, and they've been left, in many cases, destitute without the Public Safety Officer Compensation Fund. I was wondering if you could comment on that, the importance of, we've got a first step, but for the government to move forward and fully provide that support both for volunteer firefighters and professional firefighters across the country.
Sure, thank you. The proposal was brought forward initially by the firefighters associations, the Volunteer Firefighters Association. It is certainly something that the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs would support. It certainly would recognize that, you know, if we recall what happened last year with 2 Listowel firefighters who tragically were taken in the line of duty, certainly that type of financial impact to the families is significant and would certainly be in support of a change to that legislation.
Well, thank you for that. You, by any chance, would you have an idea of how many volunteer firefighters and how many professional firefighters have passed away since, in the last 10 years or since 1997, since firefighters have first started coming on the Hill to get the benefit in place that exists in the United States?
Unfortunately, I don't have statistics in the last number of years, but I know certainly with presumptive legislation that number has certainly increased over the last number of years. Certainly annually here on the Hill we honor 1,000 firefighters who've passed in the past many hundred years.
Thank you. And just a very quick last question. With the 200 hours a year threshold, do you have any idea how many volunteer firefighters go below that threshold and might not be included?
Well, I think the question is who will qualify for the tax credit. As part of our pre-budget submission to help the federal government understand the issue, the CFC conducted a survey of Canadian fire departments to determine how many volunteers firefighters would qualify under the proposal. And the research showed that 45 to 65% of Canada's volunteer firefighters would meet the 200-hour threshold to qualify for the tax credit.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Mr. MacDonald since time is short. You referenced very important the low-paying jobs. We heard just before you arrived, actually, from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who's now projecting another 100,000 Canadian families will lose a breadwinner over the course of the next few months. And certainly our numbers are still far below what they were in May 2008. That's not the reference point for the government for obvious reasons, but when we go back to May 2008, there's been stagnation, even though the labour force has increased significantly. Could you give us a sense of just to what extent the jobs are lower paying that have replaced the jobs that were higher paying prior to the last three budgets?
I think what's interesting, I mean, we can actually go back to say July or August 2008, prior to the 2008 recession, and I think the key factor is the percentage of working age adults that are working in a full-time job, and that percentage has dropped from about 52% to around 50%, and so that's an indication that while unemployment has the unemployment rate has come down from that point. What's made up the difference is not full-time jobs, but rather part-time jobs. And so the unemployment rate is definitely lower, but the problem is that people are working in part-time environments. The other challenge, too, is that StatsCan doesn't really collect this data, but they may well be working in part-time jobs, but they would like full-time jobs, and that data isn't collected. But it's certainly clear that the number of Canadians eligible to work in a full-time job is much less today than it was in 2008.
Do I have a time for a last question? No.
Unfortunately, you're out of time, but there will be other rounds, obviously. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Julian. We'll go to Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming today. I'm going to center most of my questions in relation to CARP, and Ms. Singh, we have had the opportunity to meet before in these same circumstances. I've been a member of Parliament for 7 years, just over 7 years, and I've heard many times what seniors need and what they want, and of course we're concerned with the demographic and what's taking place just generally with the trend in Canada especially. Now, you obviously are aware of the legislation today that eliminates the mandatory retirement age for federally regulated employees. And you're aware, of course, of the pension splitting of the GIS top-up, which took somewhere in the neighborhood of 680,000 seniors to be eligible for that. I think $300 million in the 2011 budget. The family caregiver tax credit, the personal exemption for income tax, which of course moved up to $10,382. I mean, it's a big, worrisome problem, and I think we've responded well in the last 5 years. And I see you nodding your head. That must mean we have.
Yes, of course. But I think I've said before that these, despite the fact that these proposals are there still remains a problem for a lot of people.
And that was going to be my next question. That was exactly going to be my next question, because our population is doubling. I think somebody told me, I think it might have been our chair that told me recently that there's 1,000 seniors, 1,000 Canadians turning 65 every day. Is that right? Yeah. So 365,000 seniors. So we're going to have a doubling of our seniors, I think in 15 or 20 years. It's fairly amazing. And obviously the cost base for that is tremendous, because everything we pay out for seniors today is going to be doubling in 20 years in essence. So what innovative proposals has your organization come up with that might help us in Canada deal with both obviously the growing demographic, but as well the problem with the recession, et cetera?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I guess the first thing to say is that age 65, although the determinant of the definition of senior, does not mean that that person becomes non-productive and automatically a burden. I think that's an important one. Even with the Parliamentary Budget Office, they still continue to use something called an age dependency ratio, which is dividing the number of age 65-year-olds by those who are under 65, which suggests that anybody who's 65 is by definition dependent, and that's the wrong way to look at it. We believe that you have to look at actual dependency, actual disability, in order to make broad public policy a little bit more sensible. So we don't need to be quite calling for a disaster because there is a larger population who will be 65.
And I agree with you. I think your organization is correct on that. Now, and that's why, of course, we moved in this legislation to eliminate the mandatory retirement. Now, what are your members saying about that?
Well,
are they pleased with that?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we would like to see that legislation ASAP, because there are people still pushing back in this day and age against such legislation. The issue there is an issue of rights. Not everybody who has the occasion to keep working past 65 will take up the opportunity, but those who want to should be given that opportunity.
And are they saying that? Are they pleased with this legislation? Are they pleased with our Conservative government?
We do poll our members. We have a bi-monthly newsletter that goes out to our membership, and we get from 3,000 to 5,000 responses in a number of days. And we have asked them the question about mandatory retirement, and there is strong support for getting rid of mandatory retirement because we see it as legislated age discrimination and unnecessary. Certainly when people hit the age of 65, there are people who prefer to keep working, but there are workplaces that ask people to leave at age 60, and we think that is certainly wrong because they are more than willing to keep working if they choose.
And I will tell you, my mother is 79, 80 in February, and she still works full-time, probably about 50 hours a week,
and
actually.
More power to her.
And she's much more productive than I am, and probably all my colleagues together, I have to tell you that as well. which is an insult to me because I don't know what happened to me. But notwithstanding that, I did ask for some innovative ideas that your organization has. Could you give us some ideas that you would like to see in the next budget?
Well, first of all, I think that there should be incentives to help people keep working if they want to. That means that workplaces need to start introducing creative policies to keep older workers employed. It means that they have to look at caregiver leave. They need to provide flexible working situations. They need to apply some training to make sure that when you have a situation of a younger supervisor to an older worker, that you actually train people around that sensitivity, which is important, and to make sure that they are using whatever technology they need in order to create that flexible work environment. So that's something that could be introduced as a tax credit for employers. For example, job fairs is another one to keep people working, looking after their own retirement, and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jean. We'll go to Ms. Grove, please, for a 5-minute round.
Thank you very much, and many questions for everybody. But I'd like to hear from Mr. Wark a little bit further on this issue of the pension challenges that you were talking about. It's an area that I am the critic for, and of course, our party was supportive of a new initiative, which was the Supplementary Canada Pension Plan. But I'd like to hear more about what exactly were some of the challenges that you were referring to when you didn't have time to finish off.
Thank you very much. The people that are being impacted by these rules are typically small business owners. That's the inclusion of the rule. They work very hard to build their business. They're often reinvesting in the business, and at some point in time they're in a position to build their own retirement income for themselves and for their other employees. And the issue is whether they have the same entitlement to participate in defined benefit pension plans like other employees in larger private and public companies. And these rules create restrictions and costs associated with implementing these kind of plans that often make it difficult to justify it on a cost basis. And the big question we have is why is the focus on the size of the plan versus what type of planning is being done, and try and get at the planning that's considered to be abusive as opposed to the nature of the business itself.
And given the fact that you're talking about small business, the government's proposal for the PPRP plan, that is pooled pension plans, any comments on and your thoughts on that?
Well, we are supportive of a program that will expand the number of people that are participating in retirement programs. And we made another submission on the retirement income sufficiency issue. And clearly it's individuals employed by small businesses that don't have pension plans of any sort in place, or self-employed individuals. In the current rules, there's a gap in them being able to participate in pension plans or retirement programs on an appropriate basis.
We talk about eliminating 65 and not forcing people to retire, but I would suggest that there's many people, because of a lack of opportunities to save in for pension plans, whether it's small business, farmers, homemakers, or whatever, there's very limited opportunity for people to be able to save. So when we talk about them choosing whether they want to work beyond 65, for many people, it's going to be a fact of life that they'll be working beyond that. Just to mention that, because we discussed that earlier, but you also talked about Germany and the kinds of choices when it came to caregivers and all of the other issues. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Yes, it's interesting. First of all, I agree that some people want to work. Other people have to work to keep working to look after their own retirement in the absence of a savings vehicle like a workplace pension. In Germany, and we're starting to study this a little bit more thoroughly, they actually have a long-term care insurance plan. Again, it's a CPP-type instrument where there are mandatory contributions. And once you are eligible to start receiving the payments, they're quite substantial. They are paid to the care recipient, and depending on whether you need moderate or heavy care, it can range in Canadian dollars from $4,000 a year to $11,000 a year. That money that you receive in cash in order to pay for caregiving, home care, even long-term care. So it's quite an extraordinary amount of money, but of course, they are looking at funding it properly and having adequate contributions. So when we look at the cost of care for a person, you have to look at it 360 degrees. Is it just financial? Is it expenses? Is it foregone salaries? Is it professional services? All of these things are necessary.
And some of the biggest issues that are facing the seniors that you're referring to, either fundable tax credit and other areas. What else do you think that we need to be doing as parliamentarians and as messages to the government, of course, so what else we can be doing to help those, not the 1,000 seniors today that are retiring, but we're looking into the future and trying to prepare so that thousands of people that are going to be retiring in the future aren't retiring in poverty.
Well, the bottom line is financial security in retirement. And whatever that means, it includes reducing expenses, increasing income if they are at a marginal level. Certainly the GIS top-up was most welcome, but of course there are 1.7 million Canadians receiving GIS, which by definition means that they're in some financial insecurity. So we're recommending improving on that. Other people whose savings were devastated in the recent downturn need some relief from rules that exist, like the mandated RIF rules. They should be gotten rid of, at least a moratorium. There are clawback rules for OAS that should be reduced, phantom income rules, all of these things that need to be adjusted so that people can keep more of their own money and help them help themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sproul. We'll go to Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd certainly like to start my questions with Mr. Kohler. And certainly you're talking about what is probably a very complex tax procedure. And, you know, I do know that in Budget 2010, identical changes were made to ensure that MICs could not be used in tax-free savings accounts. And it was really to close an identical loophole. So did your members object to this measure contained in Budget 2010? With respect to MICs, why should RSPs be treated differently than TFSAs as they're similar savings vehicles?
Certainly. I'm not aware of the TFSA rules that came in Budget 2010, but what I do know from my research when TFSAs were introduced was that they were eligible for MICs to invest, or for shareholders to invest in MICs through their TFSA. Not for everybody. For instance, I'm connected to an owner who's got over a prescribed amount, so I could not. And that was fine for me because it was a known rule that was introduced with a new vehicle. Whereas this rule is difficult for me to digest because it's retroactively imposed upon us. So it reduces our total ability to invest in our company from 25% maximum to 10% maximum, and it includes a broader definition of related parties. So the big penalty is that we've structured ourselves to be within the rules, and we find ourselves reduced retroactively and currently penalized as well.
Okay. So I think I'll now also go to CARP. I mean, here, of course, we're here to talk about the Budget Implementation Act, so C-13, and I know sometimes it's nice in these environments to do a little blue skying, and I think certainly that blue skying needs to be done in terms of and in partnerships with the province. I mean, when you talk about, you know, one province is doing something and one isn't, when really, you know, many of the responsibilities, those conversations need to be had. But I certainly want to follow up on Mr. Jean's comments in terms of the huge host of measures that have already been taken, and then in the first part of this, the Budget Implementation Act, the GIS increase to the GIS, and this measure here. And to be quite frank, we're heading into very, very uncertain economic times. I have 3 children. Most of the people you represent have children, and I would think that there comes a time when we have to also be thinking of the generations down the road. We've made significant measures, and to be quite frank, at this time, you know, I certainly support conversations, but I certainly couldn't support the changes that you're asking for in this particular bill.
Well, thank you for that question. I know that there's a concern when we help seniors that somehow we are not helping the younger generation, and that is not our purpose. Our purpose is to focus on those vulnerable communities who are not in a position to improve their own situation themselves. One example is single women. They will not benefit from the pension splitting changes that this government has brought in, which were mostly extremely welcomed by our
But they will
membership.
benefit from GIS if they're low income. So, I guess my
Yes,
point
they would.
is,
And
we're talking about increasing a debt. We already know that this budget is going to be a budget that's going to result in a deficit. So I think we've hit a good balance.
I think there is an opportunity to improve their lot. The dollars amounts for those people on an individual basis, as you saw very well with the top-up of the GIS, is a limited amount of actual dollars in the grander scheme of things, but means a great deal to that targeted group of people. And we would say the same thing in relation to, for example, single women who would, on one hand, those who have a bit of money who cannot split their pension income. Then there are single women who are under the age of 65 who do not have access to their own OAS, would not benefit from the spouse allowance that their sisters who are married would get. So those are the kinds of targeted groups that we worry about, because there's no way for them at this point to change their circumstances.
And I just want to make a quick comment to the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. Certainly, I represent a community that has many, many volunteer fire departments, and I know without reservation they were cheering this measure. They've been wanting it for a long time, and so I just want to express my thanks for the great work that they do.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. We'll go to Mr. Marston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and saying welcome. I just want to say from the onset that I've seen you as a champion for seniors and pensions for a number of years. Mr. Layton actually introduced me to you, I think it was in 2009. And since that time, you've made a number of presentations in places that I've been taking part in. And you will know the NDP's called for a phased-in increase to the core assets of the Canada Pension Plan, with the concept of doubling it over 30 years. And you'll also be very aware from the testimony just the other day that you gave that the government response, and I want to offer to the government that I do agree that it was a beginning as the PRPP. But one of the concerns I have is that the PRPP leaves Canadians still exposed to market fluctuations in a way that I don't think is acceptable. And a point you made in your last presentation to us was that you were concerned about that there should be a capping of the fees for the PRPPs. So I was just wondering if you would like to comment further on that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, the focus for us is to make sure that future generations of retirees have access to a savings vehicle that will help them provide for their own retirement and obviously not have to fall upon the public purse. The focus there is to make sure that whatever vehicle we come up with new from what we have now is a net improvement on the status quo. The fact that it's going to be a pooled fund is already by itself a massive improvement. Acknowledgement that there is a retirement gap, a savings gap, is also a major improvement. That said, we made reference in our submissions, written submission, to an Australian report based upon their 12 years of experience with a similar plan. And the bottom line consideration there was the fact that the fees wiped out most of their savings, and so they were no better off than if they just left their money in the bank. They had the net positive of actually saving that money instead of spending it, but beyond that, there was no measurable value. So we want to learn from that. We want to take a lesson from that to make sure that when we introduce the project here, that we don't fall into that trap, which is why, because this is proposed to be handled by the private sector, we need to look at those fees. The CPP, OMERS, teachers, all of those kinds of plans are in fact non-profit, if you will, even though their own management fees are quite enough. The added profit feature is not part of their statements. So it is important to look at that as a way of controlling costs and not eroding savings.
Thank you. Mr. Warwick, I'd like to take this over to you now because you're talking the PRPPs and small business and at least gave them a vehicle. From our standpoint, and you were talking about defined benefit plans, the Canada Pension Plan is owned by Canadians. It's a defined benefit plan. If all Canadians had access to that and paid into it. Would you not see that as a solid vehicle going forward for those people?
When we did our review of the various programs that were being proposed, the target group that we thought needed to be benefited were employees of small businesses and the self-employed. And although the CPP proposal or supplementary pension plan proposal...
No, we're not talking supplementary. That's a Liberal position. We're talking about increasing the core assets of CPP in order to grow it to doubling, which is, we're talking in 30 years, $1,800 a month is what it would accrue to.
Yeah, the specific concern we had with that was the time it would take to integrate that in to provide a benefit, and the fact that it would put an additional cost on business owners, small business owners and others at a point in time where it's a very difficult financial environment.
Thank you.
So we don't say don't do it, but we think there are other things that should be done.
Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
You have 30 seconds.
My. You're missing you stated about the increase in cancer rates from 2000 to 2009. Last night the CBC reported that cancer has passed heart disease as the #1 killer. I've lost 9 friends and family in 15 months. They all wanted to stay at home. And you mentioned in your presentation there about a balance between an insurance model paying part of that cost. Could you expand on that? I hope there's a little bit of time.
I think the point is that when people are looking after this care at home, it will still cost, but it does not cost as much as in institutions. We're talking about chronic diseases or even severe diseases like cancer. When we're talking about chronic diseases, for example, dementia, it doesn't require necessarily the kind of nursing level of care and costs that you would find in an institution. If there's an opportunity to deal with those kinds of costs at home, the system would save.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marsden. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, witnesses. I want to ask my first question to Ms. Zhang. And I'm going to go down a little bit of a different road here, and just if everyone could just bear with me for a second. I want to talk about the National Securities Regulator. And I know this is something that's is important on as far as our seniors go. And during the campaign, the Prime Minister made a promise to seniors in the country that he would increase the penalties for elder abuse and all that. But there's another kind of elder abuse, and it's financial elder abuse. And the legislation for the new National Securities Regulator, which is currently before the Supreme Court, calls for an enforcement agency. And I'd like you to talk about that enforcement agency and what that would mean for, in terms of preventing elder abuse, financial elder abuse, and how that would be beneficial for us, for everyone.
Thank you for that. In fact, the proposal to add a strong enforcement arm to the National Securities Regulator is extremely important to our members, many of whom have investments, who have been, who also feel, and there's a strong belief that many of the investments they were put into were inappropriate. In other cases, their families have invested their money for them. All of these kinds of issues would be part and parcel of the focus of such an enforcement agency. Why it is important, despite the fact that all the other regulators purport to have a complaints agency or some kind of consumer protection, in fact they don't. They might be mediators, they can't focus on restitution. It's hard for the average retail investors to access that. This specialist body that is being proposed excites us because there will be, first of all, specialists who will help with the prosecution. They will have authority to provide restitution, even to charge criminally. That provides a major sanction against financial fraud, often perpetrated against seniors.
Thank you. I'd like to direct my next line of questioning to Mr. MacDonald. I mean, as you know, Canada has received rave reviews from around the international organizations, economic organizations from around the world, World Economic Forum, and Economist Intelligence Unit, OECD, IMF, Forbes magazine, on and on and on, that Canada is the strongest economy in the G8, that we are well positioned to weather, an economic maelstrom, that there are international repercussions that could reach our borders. But for all intents and purposes, Canada has managed its economy really well, and we're recognized as that. I'm just curious, where did you come up with your economic figures in terms of the numbers that you're saying that unemployment is increasing? Where are these figures from? I'm just curious.
In answer to the previous question, well, unemployment has certainly increased since the crisis in 2008, which has left 1.5 million Canadians either unemployed or underemployed.
Sir, with all due respect, that's not really true. Canada has gained 650,000 jobs since July 2009, and actually has more people employed today than before the recession. So,
right, but the number of people that are in the labor market now is bigger than before the recession as well.
That's a natural cause of a good economy. More people jump into the labor market because there are a lot more jobs available.
Yeah, the unemployment rate.
So to say that there's higher unemployment is really just a little deceiving.
Well, clearly there is higher unemployment than there was the unemployment rate is higher today than it was in 2008 in July, for instance.
That's not true.
It is true.
Well, if you could provide that to the committee, I'd be really happy about that.
Okay.
Also, I was just looking at your website. Where do you receive your funding from?
Individual Canadians primarily, member funded.
Okay, where would you place yourself in the political spectrum? Sort of
progressive.
Progressive. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I noticed that you've got an event coming up with Stephen Lewis and Michelle Landsberg on your site. You refer to the oil sands as tar sands.
In Toronto, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Adler. We'll go to Monsieur Giguet, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My questions might be a little technical, and I apologize for that, but my question is for Mr. Kohler. When C-13 came about, I did not look at this issue. It was an anti-avoidance issue raised by finance, and I was not paying attention to this. But based on reading of your document, based on the complexity of the legislation, there might have been something that we might have lost sight of. It might be useful to bring someone here from the department to explain to us the complexity of this issue of evasion. This whole issue, this anti-evasion policy, there was also some abusive, some collateral damage was experienced, but this is to compensate for certain measures. In fact, half of the legislation is based on this. I'm looking at your document. Your second document is from people from the CALU. Individual pension plans you were referring to, and the problem with the department, or for the department, is it doesn't simply look at the issue of the right to an individual pension plan for a small company owner, but rather we're looking at the entire spectrum financially. Issues of tax fairness. Owners of a private company under Canadian ownership have a right to being exonerated from some capital cost. They can bill their own company a rent for their headquarters. They can income split. I think that in this respect that the department, frankly, is right to limit, even just for tax fairness issues. If you look at the entire tax spectrum, when you look at people who own these companies, do you not think that they're already doing quite well in terms of tax cuts?
I would agree with the member that there are a number of tax benefits applicable to small business owners that were put in place to encourage their growth, and to encourage employment in Canada through the growth of small business owners and to assist them in transitioning their business into a larger operation. That is certainly true. The IPP legislation operates on several different levels. First of all, we believe that the small business owner should be entitled to the same benefits as employees of larger operations as defined by the rules. And you could contrast the way the rules work. If you have a 3-person plan, for example, they're fully impacted by these rules, but by adding one more member to the plan, they are excluded from the rules. But if you have a 4-member plan that becomes a 3-member plan, you fall back into the rules. So there just seems to be an arbitrariness of the rules which adversely impacts these individuals. And with specifically the RIF minimum rules, they're retroactive in effect. They apply to plans that currently exist as well as to new plans, which we don't understand given the power of the CRA to deal with this issue already. There's already federal court of appeal decisions that support the CRA challenging the specific concerns they have with respect to accumulation of surplus. And there are also a number of technical issues with the rules which make them very difficult for a small business owner to comply with and administer. So there are a number of elements of tax fairness that we see in the proposals that we feel need to be addressed.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Il me reste 30 secondes.
30 seconds? That's not long. You're talking about tax fairness. Well, there is already a maximum of $22,000 you can contribute to your RIF. I think 85% of Canadians earn less than 50,000 doctors who incorporate. In terms of tax fairness, I find that RIFs do not go far enough. Do you not think that the department would be right to restrict this avoidance?
Mr. Wark, a brief response, please.
Well, my response would be if you consider it to be avoidance, why are you only applying it to groups of 3 or less where it includes an owner-manager? If there is a concern, it should be extended to all taxpayers that are in similar circumstances. That would be my response.
Okay, thank you. Merci. Go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kohler, you got my time. This is a complicated issue, and I understand that the government is closing a loophole. Can you just dumb this down a little bit? Because the way I understand it is that a MIC doesn't pay taxes in a regular corporate tax rate. Now, but in a sense, what happens is the taxes flow through and become part of the mortgage again. Have I got that right?
Yep, the income is dividend to the shareholders without being taxed corporately. It's taxed in the hand of the shareholders.
That's the issue that the government has with this. Explain to this committee why that isn't fair, why the government, in your estimation, has this wrong.
Well, I think that MICs are a very good thing in the economy, first of all, and there's lots of money already invested in it.
Yeah, I know, and I agree with that. I've had consultations with those that are involved with them. You do good stuff with it. We don't doubt that. But you know, are those holding MICs or generating MICs doing something different than the average taxpayer?
I'm not really sure if I understand the question in terms of.
Well, are you getting a tax benefit that the rest of us don't get? Like I'm allowed to put in $22,000 or $22,000 into a RIF, and you know that's my maximum. Are you exceeding that maximum?
No, we're not exceeding that maximum. If I understand your question correctly, any Canadian can invest in a MIC. It's not a closed system. It's very much like a REIT might be, a real estate investment trust. It's a pass-through corporately. It's not taxed.
Are your members, do they act as corporations?
Yes.
That's the problem.
The corporation is the MIC. and it was instituted in the Income Tax Act in 1972, so it's got a long-standing history in the country. It's very difficult to understand the issue tax-wise, but the real issue is that what I understand to be abuses in the mixed structure are trying to be attacked by way of lots of other loopholes as well. And I think the way this legislation goes about it is that it includes people who are following the current legislation. The current legislation is working. The MICs are widely held. MICs are investing in the economy really well. The problem is, technically, I think the problem is that some people are using them abusively, and I think there's ways to close the loop without affecting healthy, legitimate enterprise.
Do you have in most of your members, and I don't know if you even have member organizations, but are they administered by someone who doesn't charge a fee, but allots that fee into the MIC? Is that correct?
A MIC can operate in a few different ways, if I understand your question correctly. Some MICs are operated by a manager outside the MIC, and some MICs are operated by the MIC itself. Management fees can be made inside the MIC or charged to the MIC, or the income can just be left in the MIC and employees paid by the MIC. Either way, there's no tax leaving the system. An outside manager could pay corporately taxes as well, but it's solidly within the current legislation for a MIC to be its own manager as well.
And you've laid out a solution to this now. And I don't know how much time I have. I don't have a whole lot because I got one more question. But in a nutshell, what's that solution? How much time? 1 minute?
Yeah, the solution.
30 seconds.
The solution would be that we allow MICs to not hold shares of an entity that is arm's length to the other shareholders. That would prevent people from stuffing their RSPs with tax-free money, and I think that's what the Department of Finance is concerned about. And yeah, we've got a one-line suggestion amendment that could fix that problem.
And to Ms. McLeod's question, that you're not being blindsided by this. You did have indication of this in 2010, in the budget 2010?
No, we didn't have any indication in 2010. We had indication in 2011. I personally learned about the rules after the election in June.
20 seconds.
But the legislation as being advanced is going to give you a period of 10 years to move out of these, but it'll take what you're allocating is that it'll take away this whole industry.
It won't take away the whole industry, but it'll take away a significant portion of it. Like, for instance, my RSP will get taxed this year, and I'll have to get it liquidated completely before that 10 years is gone. Otherwise, well, it'll be decimated, really. My income, my retirement savings is decimated by this rule.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. We'll go to Monsieur Mai, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you very much for being here on such a short notice. Quickly to Mr. Keller, could you submit the one-liner change? Because actually we're voting on it tomorrow. It's really important for us to really have that, and we can actually move forward. Also, same thing with Kalu, if you have one thing specific, and we can have a look at it. Maybe you can submit it, and then we can maybe propose it, or at least ask questions about it. We'll see if the other sides agree. Ms. Ang, and it'll also affect Mr. De Hooge. Very large question regarding making the tax credit refundable. How would it benefit your members? So maybe we'll start with Ms. Ang, or how many people it can affect also?
Well, the key point there is that a person who has no taxes to pay will not benefit at all from the non-refundable tax credit in the amount of $300. So the people that we're concerned with, of course, are the lower income people who are providing care, and more importantly, the people who have to quit their jobs in order to provide round-the-clock care. Those individuals will not get any support out of the current proposal, and since the category has been opened and there is a value for this category, that we should make sure that there is a substantive support.
Thank you very much. Mr. De Hooge.
Thank you, and I think the CFC has been advocating for tax relief for volunteer fire service for the past decade, And the proposal that we put forward during the pre-budget submissions was developed so as to positively impact Canadian volunteer firefighters while remaining realistic within the government's fiscal situation. So this is a cost-effective solution to the recruitment and retention challenges facing the volunteer fire service, and we're pleased with how the situation has come out with this budget. So, in short, we based our submission on the past, and certainly leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald? Questions regarding, you spoke about Part 9 infrastructure, where we've been telling the government we need to invest in infrastructure. Can you tell us why Part 9 is not sufficient? Or, because we've been also proposing of having the gas tax fund indexed, and also, can you tell us the advantages of having more investment in infrastructure?
Definitely. Certainly one of the proposals is to index the gas tax. I think I was proposing something much bigger, which is that particularly in the uncertain times in which we find ourselves, the Canadian government is uniquely placed because of its low debt load, to be much more proactive than other governments can be in terms of buffering the effects of the Great Recession that continues to drag on. And so I think one of the major benefits of infrastructure investment today through the gas tax or through other mechanisms is not only reduced unemployment, but also longer-term economic growth. The Canadian government today can borrow at unprecedentedly low interest rates, while at the same time employing people that are in fact unemployed, and at the same time, because of the slack in the economy, likely not see an increase in inflation. So it's actually an ideal time for us to start to whittle down the infrastructure deficit we've built up over the last 10 or 20 years by underinvesting in infrastructure.
And we've also been telling the government not to just go ahead with corporate tax cut that's not specific, and then you have the companies not reinvesting the amount. Could you maybe expand on if we were to help those companies invest in greener technology, for instance, or greener energy, how that would benefit the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my concerns with the decline in the general corporate tax rate is that it doesn't target tax cuts to actions. So it doesn't matter whether a company invests in the economy or create jobs; they get the corporate tax cut. It doesn't make any difference. And so, if we target those to manufacturers, just generally towards more capital spending, whether it's green or not, frankly, but more capital spending at all, or job creation for that matter, you get a much bigger bang for your buck. And it'd be much more accountable, I think.
Thank you. Mr. Mai. I'm going to Mr. Adler first, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think in reflecting, I think I understand now where Mr. McDonald may have misunderstood. We were comparing apples and oranges. What I was saying was that Canada has had, since the end of the recession, the largest employment growth in the G7 countries. And that's what I was referring to, and so I think I understood where the confusion may have arisen. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Ms. Glover now, please.
All right, I want to take a moment to thank you as well for coming, and I'm learning as I'm listening as well. So I appreciate that you've come here. And we're here with open minds. And so before I ask my question, I will be asking you a question, Mr. Kohler. I'm going to ask you to repeat the line that you mentioned before. So I'm going to give you a second to group your thoughts. But I do want to take a moment. Fire Chief, I'm speaking from the heart here. I want to thank you very much for your service. As you're sitting there talking, I have worked very closely with firemen over the 20 years that I was a police officer, and we lost two very, very special firemen in February of 2007 that I knew very well. Tom Nichols and Harold Lassar died in a house fire in my riding, a home that is owned by a good friend of mine. And I do want to pay homage to them while you're here and acknowledge that you all put your lives at risk for us, and we cannot thank you enough. And this is a small measure, but I do want to assure you that the government does take what you do to heart, and we take it very seriously. And Minister Flaherty, for one, is committed to making sure, if he can, that he does everything in his power to help you. So, having said that, Mr. Kohler, if you wouldn't mind, the line that you were referring to, so I understand how you think this would change the Act.
The proposal that I would make is just simply to more target what I understand the abuses to be is I think there's some concern that companies, mix, were investing in companies that weren't arm's length to, let's say, the managers or the major owners. And so they were benefiting maybe by finding a way to get heavy profits into their RRSP as a loophole. And that's...
So the line is to...
The amendment I'm suggesting?
Yeah.
The suggestion I would make is that we exempt mix under the current anti-avoidance rules, but add that mix should not be able to invest in a company which is not arm's length to one of the major owners of the company. Thereby we can get away from people stuffing their RSP, people getting money into their RSP that really it isn't the government's intention that they should be there.
And I understand what you're saying there, but we have another problem. Some are not doing that. So some are actually abusing it, and I'm so glad that you acknowledge our attempts in this are really genuinely to close the tax loopholes, which are harmful, and are abusive. But there are some who are not doing it that way. You know, there are some who are actually trying to change the way that they do business by not actually declaring salaries, for example, and being able to roll that into their RRSPs. And by doing that, they get a tax break and a tax advantage, which was never what this was for, right? Like, this was registered retirement savings plan is for exactly that, right? It was never designed to be a corporate tax shelter in any way, shape, or form, or a salary tax shelter. So how would you fix that?
Well, I think that could be a tough problem, but it would be very hard to manufacture that. Although people are creative, I'll give them that. Yeah. Maybe. I don't know of any circumstances, so I'd love to look at it and understand if we could close it. MICs have to be a minimum of 20 shareholders. So for somebody to put their salary into the MIC, the rest of the shareholders are going to share that salary, that income, that benefit. So that person isn't directly benefiting alone.
Right.
Maybe.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you have another suggestion? I have 30 seconds. I wish I could spend more time with you. If you had another suggestion on, how we might ease it so that, it captures what we need to capture to eliminate the abuse, and yet provides you and people in your situation with the amount of time necessary to adjust, what would you say?
Well, I really believe that MIC should be exempt from this rule. The change of the related parties, though, is also a big burden. So changing it from you're counted as just a wife, husband, and their minor children to be including all extended family is quite difficult on MIC owners, I believe. I think that's part of the hardest problem we've got. And taxing.
And I get that, but it doesn't fix the other problem we have with the abuse. Sorry.
Ms. Glover, there's an ex-conservative round if you wanted to start it, or if you do need more time. I am going to follow up on this as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kohler, I just want to make sure I understand this well. I mean, I obviously have sympathy for any small business organizations that are providing mortgages and providing income to individuals. But just so I go back, I mean, corporations typically they pay tax, and then the dividends that are paid out to shareholders, there's a tax on that. So MICs, they operate differently. They don't pay any corporate level tax. The profits are flowed through to the shareholder who then pays taxes as described. So MICs are subject to only one level of tax, but what is the problem here, which the finance has identified, is some individuals were exploiting the rules by putting the whole MIC in their RSP or their RIF. And one of the things you said, and in your response to Ms. McLeod, you said invest in our company. And that's the issue, is people are using the very generous tax deduction for the Canadians with respect to their RSP, but it's not to invest in companies, it's to save for retirement. So that is what the problem is here. So I'm still unclear as to how your proposal actually addresses that problem.
If the problem is that MICs have a 35-year history of doing this. So we are a creation of government. So I think that part is operating the way it should. People, it is tax RSP eligible.
Makes are, yes.
Yep.
But do you agree with me that RSPs were not created to, I mean, they were not created for this purpose. They were created for people to build up a retirement, but not to flow through to use to invest in their companies as a way of avoiding tax?
Well, I don't see any mischief going on, though, because it's still the profits, just like any other company, are being flowed through to the investors as intended by the Act originally. If the government's worried about the tax leakage on that, I think that we should sit down with the department.
I don't think it's the leakage. I think it's that people are getting a benefit, or people are using RSPs for the purpose for which they are not intended, and they are getting a benefit that other Canadians are not getting. Like, the issue is not with the MIC as a structure. The issue is with the MIC as it relates to those who are using their RSPs. And so that is the problem. So how does your amendment fix that problem, whereas the current legislative suggestions are not as good in your view? So how is your suggestion a better way of addressing that problem?
I guess I apologize. I'm not sure I understand how people are using their RSPs as they are not intended. To me, the way that our MIC operates, we're very much using it within the confines of the Tax Act. We're not investing anything that we should not be, and we'd be happy to open up that question. And is our mix not investing in something they shouldn't be? And I believe that we could fix that and close that loophole. I think that could be a legitimate loophole.
So describe how you do it in your business. And do you mind doing that? Or
not at all.
Okay.
How we invest?
And how you do with your RSP. How you act, like, how you combine your RSP with the MIC.
Well, I buy shares in my corporation.
Yeah.
I either buy them directly outside of my RSP, or I invest the money in my RSP, and the RSP buys the MIC shares. So I can invest in my own MIC either way. And typically we do. I would say less, maybe half of our shareholders, our share certificates are in RSPs versus non-RSPs.
So just repeat the first part again as to what you do, just so I make sure I have that correct.
Sorry, which?
Like the first part of what you said, just repeat that.
I can either own shares directly of the MIC, or they're owned through my RSP. And that, I could buy Suncor shares in my RSP or outside my RSP. It happens either way.
Suncor pays corporate tax, the MIC does not.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And MICs were intended to be a flow-through from their creation.
I understand that, but the problem that finance has identified, which I have to say the more reading I do, the more I'm sympathetic to what finance is saying, in the sense of the RSP is being used for an advantage here that is not fair, because MICs do not pay corporate tax. And therefore, if the RSP is being used in this purpose, that's not appropriate. RSPs are supposed to be used for retirement, not for, as you've said, investing in your own company.
Well,
I'm engaging in a dialogue. That's just where I'm coming from right now.
Yeah. Well, I think I understand, but really, it was absolutely the intention of the legislation. We're defined under 130.1 of the Income Tax Act, and we were when we were legislated in 1972, I believe, we were RSP eligible at that very point. So it was a way to encourage investment into this sector. It was an enticement. And it was, since it was always registered account eligible, I believe we're just doing what we were always able to do.
Okay. My time is up. I'll continue. Maybe I will continue later on. We'll go to Mr. Julian, though, please.
Monsieur le Président, tu poses des questions intéressantes.
Mr. Chairman, you're asking good questions. What I would ask is perhaps for Mr. Giguère to ask some questions in my stead. I think he wanted to continue on that theme. What the committee has to understand of the situation is that it was a legal, lawful situation. What they were doing was legal. But from one day to the next, huge abuses took place, and I can see the nature of the abuses that could have occurred. Those 20 shareholders in a company were members of the same family. Then when you transferred your salary into it, then the whole gang of the family members would benefit, and that would be major abuse. These companies did not have to pay any taxes. They were doubly advantaged. But the problem is that there were some people that respected the rules, and then from one day to the next, retroactively, they're being told that what they did was illegal retroactively, and they're going to now be penalized 100%, and that is the problem. If people did not break the rules, the law, they need a transition period to adapt. And that period, that transition period, does not exist. And that's normal, and that is an abuse. When you say that the law is complex, it's clearly so here. You need a transition measure to allow for people who have always been upstanding and respectful of the law to not have this 100% tax in that sense. The idea of removing the tax shelter, that's really abusive tax planning, I would say.
Je laisse ma parole à mon cher confrère.
Okay. So I'll split the rest of my time with my colleague.
On the issue of the non-refundable versus the refundable tax credit for the caregiver, do you have any estimate as to what the differential would be? How many people who wouldn't be able to access if it was non-refundable will be able to access if it is refundable? I'd also like you to speak to, if you could for a moment, speak to the savings, because you did reference that earlier, that home care costs, caregivers actually help to subsidize the healthcare system enormously, because otherwise we're talking about seniors who end up in acute care beds at massive cost. So home care makes a lot of sense. Providing caregiver support makes a lot of sense. How overall, putting aside the personal benefits, how does the overall fiscal situation for governments improve if we move more to that model and expand non-refundable to refundable?
Thank you for the question. The opportunity to divert a massive amount of demand from the healthcare system is huge, and I recognize that you're diverting it from a provincial budget in the healthcare system, but if we think of a single taxpayer, it's important for us to save to the whole system. In this case, at this point, it's estimated that family caregivers provide 70% of the community care now for seniors, and we estimate, and there has been research that indicates that the value of their work is somewhere around $25 billion a year. That's the kind of money you'd have to spend if you didn't have these people providing care. The cost per person in home care versus being in an institution at the same level of care was described in a 1990 document, and I would say that the numbers would be more dramatically different now, indicated that with moderate care at home, the annual amount would be around $9,500, in an institution around $25,000, for a 63% saving for that one individual. In heavy care, obviously the savings would be less, because at home you still have to pay professional home care workers as well. And the difference there was between $35,000 and $45,000. But I just checked today, and the province of Ontario pays a per diem per resident valued at $55,000 a year. And in that circumstance, that's not even counting the copay that the family pays for nursing home care. In such a case, your savings are less dramatic because you have heavy care at home as well, but nonetheless, there are huge dollars. If we looked at the approximately 600,000 people who need heavy care, then we're looking at the difference in savings. When you multiply that out, in the neighborhood of $6 billion a year difference between having them at home versus having them in institutional care. So those are the kind of magnitudes of dollars that can be saved. I mean, please don't hold me to those exact calculations. I think this is something that Finance Department should probably apply some resources to get exact figures, but those are the magnitudes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Julian. We'll go to Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wasn't going to take a question, but it was something that Mr. McDonald said. I couldn't help but take note of it. And, you know, I was looking at his website of his organization, and very interesting. He's gone from his organization's gone from 2 to 20 full-time staff, quite a success story. And I was wondering, first of all, if the staff in your organization actually write your Wikipedia webpage. Because on the Wikipedia webpage, well, that's why I was wondering, because specifically it says, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is an independent, nonpartisan policy research institute in Canada that leans to the political left. And, you know, you mentioned you're progressive, and I was just curious because it obviously, most people write their own Wikipedia website, so I would imagine that that's what it says, and that's the situation. And I was just kind of curious if you have any comments on that, because as well, you talk about things in here, and I know alternative policy is interesting, but you talk about pushing to privatize health care, which quite frankly scares me, and indeed that aging population won't cripple health care, and we've heard evidence that we believe it will, many of the witnesses as well. And you say further on, or at least Mr. Campbell, the executive director, says the alternative federal budget is a what-if exercise, which I think is great, but what a government could do if it were truly committed to an economic, social, and environmental agenda that reflects the values of the large majority of Canadians as opposed to the interests of a privileged minority.
Est-ce qu'on discute de C13 présentement?
Are we discussing C13 at this point?
With respect to every member, with respect to questions on C13, there's lax and there's lax. Yes.
As I was saying, Mr. Chair, and I will get to it.
I think I did allow questions broadly on this, so I'm going to allow Mr. Jean to ask it.
The reference to a privileged minority, and my question to him is in relation to the budgets that we've had as a Conservative government over the last 6 years. We've done transit pass credits, tax credits. We've put more money out to seniors than ever in the history of the country. We've put more money into infrastructure than ever in the history of the country, $45 billion over 7 years, which frankly helps every Canadian. Low-income taxpayers, we've taken off the roll. We've given more tax credits, training tax credits, home retrofits. We've done more as a federal government than ever in the history of Canada for the average and low-income Canadians. And I would argue with you to say any different than that today, because we've spread money in all of our federal budgets to more Canadians than ever before. Would you not agree?
I think certainly that in terms of the OAS-GIS in the last budget, that was certainly a positive move that goes directly to low-income Canadians. I think my concern is that a focus on tax credits in particular, particularly non-refundable tax credits, are more likely to go to upper-income Canadians.
But the problem that I have is you mentioned right on your main page of your website, or your executive director does, that you want to stop the privileged few from getting all the money, is in essence what it says. And I mean, we've indicated in the last 5 years of budgets clearly, I think you can see, anybody that can read a budget can see that we have spread that money overall right across the spectrum of middle income and low income Canadians, not the privileged few. And I take offense to that, to be blunt, and I would ask you to remove it from your website.
I think that our concern is that we are continuing to see rising inequality in Canada, with more income going to upper income Canadians and less going to middle and lower income Canadians. But I think should be a concern to all members.
But certainly you can agree that our budgets have reflected the disbursement of the income as a majority to the low and middle income Canadians over the last 5 years. You can agree with that,
I have not done that analysis. I think that particularly in the tax cuts and tax adjustment side, most of that is going to go to the upper end. Although, in fairness, the OAS-GIS changes would definitely go to the lower end.
We've heard that corporations don't pay taxes, Canadians do. So clearly the tax breaks are going to be passed on, same as the tax benefits, to all Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the drop in the corporate income tax rate, which is primarily going to benefit those owning stock, which again is primary upper income Canadians, has been one of the biggest tax breaks on the corporate side certainly we've seen in some time. And so if we want to talk at the corporate income tax side, I think
I'm more interested in what the middle and low income get through our budgets, because that's really all the control we have. We have mechanisms to spread that money through policy, but obviously the money we can give back is to those people, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, just briefly, Mr. McDonald, response.
Yeah, I think on the corporate income tax side, those cuts have been extremely expensive, and the effects in terms of employment, particularly on low income, is that connection is not at all clear. And so I think that money could be better spent, and that's certainly something that we argue for in an alternative federal budget.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna take the next round as the chair, and I want to return Mr. Kohler, and I want to get as much information on the table because we are going to have finance officials here again tomorrow, and so obviously they will be asked to respond to what you're saying. But in terms of the issue of the transition period, I mean the budget introduced and the Budget Implementation Act, obviously there was consultation done, and there were 4 primary changes done. 5-year transitional period to facilitate the divestiture has been extended to 10 years from 5 years. The special tax that was proposed to apply to income earned and gains accrued and realized on prohibited investments during the transitional period has been replaced with an income inclusion under normal income tax rules. And there's 2 more items here as well, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, do these 4 measures address the concerns that you've had? If so, how much? And if they don't address your concerns, explain that why. Just put that on the record so for the committee's information.
The extensions of 5 years to 10 years was certainly welcome. What it means is we're still taxed in those 10 years. So my RSP is taxed this year for any income after March 31st, I believe, and on through the end of this year. So the transition period is extended, but it's still got penalties all along. So that is the difficulty that the main difficulty I have with those transition period just doesn't go far enough for what I consider to be corporations and people and shareholders who have not taken advantage of any abuse.
Okay. So you're just, the final question to you on this is that what finance sees as a problem in terms of using the RSP in a manner combined with the MIC, like your view is it was legitimate, MICs were set up legitimately, RSPs are set up legitimately, and it is okay to use an RSP in this manner in combination with the MIC. That is your view, very different from what the finance department is.
No, I would believe that the finance department would agree with that. It's natural for this corporate status is natural. It happens elsewhere. It's not.
They would agree with that, but what they're concerned about is what they see as what they would consider abuse with respect to the RSP and the MIC, not the MIC in and of itself.
Right, and we've tried hard to understand what the abuses could be, and I think I've just wrapped my head around it just today, what they could be, and I think it's investing, having a MIC invest in something that's not a mortgage, but finding a vehicle of profits to get them into their RSP, which really, I do kind of see that as a potential loophole.
Because 50% of the MIC has to be in mortgages, but 50% could not be, is that correct?
That's right. It could be in deposits or maybe even stocks and bonds. Although the Canadian Securities Commission has put out national instrument, I don't know the number, I can get it for you, but the Alberta Securities Commission is not allowing us to invest in anything other than mortgages and cash deposits. Small exceptions apply, like the property that you own your business and run it out of. But I don't think that's a loophole that's going to be around anyway, because the Securities Commission is going to close that. It certainly has in Alberta.
Okay. Appreciate that. I just want to come to Kaylu again. Can you indicate to me how many individuals that you know of will be affected by the changes in the legislation?
We formed a working group, and there were 4 members on it, and they probably represent a large percentage of our members that are working in this area. I don't think there are a large number of IPPs in Canada. The members on the working group had 30 to 40 in place.
30 to 40 IPPs.
IPPs, that's correct.
And you talk in your presentation about RIF minimum rules. Is this something that if RIF minimum rules were changed in future time, that actually that would address the concerns you're raising here today?
Sorry, just to clarify, if the RIF minimum rules are changed in the future, will it address our concerns? Is that the question?
Because you talk about RIF minimum rules being outdated and concern about that. Is that something that in future can be addressed? I'm not sure why the bells are ringing, but
yeah. I think probably this committee has heard submissions, if not this year and prior years, about updating the RIF minimum rules, and it's a concern for both RSP holders and in respect to these rules. We have more general concerns, but if the RIF minimum rules are updated, certainly that will be an improvement over the current impact of these rules on IPPs.
Okay, my final question, just quickly, if you did want to stay, you could certainly submit it, but so your proposed amendment to this committee would be what?
There would be two potential proposals. One is to create a de minimis rule where if the surplus is less than a certain percent of the actuarial liabilities, this rule does not apply. The federal government recently implemented a rule where they allow up to 25% of pension surplus to cover variations or the economic downturn cycles. Another approach would be to measure the value of the benefits in the plan versus a life annuity, which is really what an IPP or defined benefit pension plan is supposed to provide, which is lifetime benefits. So at age 72, an actuarial evaluation could be done based on what income can be derived from a life annuity from the value of the benefit in the pension plan, compare that to the benefit that's actually being provided, and if it's greater, then that becomes the benefit that has to come out of the plan.
Okay. I appreciate you putting that on the table and that information. Colleagues, I'm out of time, but I don't have any further MPs on the question list. Okay, Mr. Julian and then Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You can see that we want to make sure we get all the information from you, and it's been a very interesting discussion, both from the comments from the Chair and his questions and the comments from Monsieur Giguère. I'd like to come back to you, Mr. MacDonald, because I don't think you really had a chance to respond when Mr. Jean, he was being a little overeager, was asking asking questions. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond a little bit more, because I think this is important. This is where the sort of bubble that Ottawa lives under is kind of burst when we start talking about Bill C-13, what's missing and what the reality is out there. We've heard some of that, the fact that there'll be 100,000 more breadwinners put out in the streets in the coming months. You referenced rising inequality, and I'd like you, if you could talk about that. I think your institute has done some studies to at what point we've turned back inequality. Some people have talked about the late 1920s, that the clock has been turned back on inequality in this country back to those dates. I wonder if you could confirm to me, confirm to us, to what extent we've turned the clock back because of the policies of the last few years. You've talked about the lower paying jobs that have resulted, and the fact that we actually have more people in the labour force unemployed now than May 2008. That's important. And you've also talked about the debt load of the average Canadian family. The middle class is living a debt crisis. There's no other way to put it. 150% of their annual income. The debt loads, families have been struggling with lower and lower wages by indebting themselves more and more. So if you could have this committee revise Bill C-13 so it actually dealt with some of the realities. Some of the provisions are good. Some of the provisions clearly don't deal with the realities as we see them out across the country. What would the changes be that you would bring in so that we could actually address these problems that don't normally penetrate the Ottawa bubble?
Thank you. I think in terms of looking at some of the overall costs that were not necessarily included in this bill, if we take a look at corporate income tax cuts worth about $15 billion a year, the departmental freeze is worth about $2 billion by 2013, and the $4 billion proposed cuts in the 2012 federal budget. We're now totaling over $20 billion in changes that primarily benefit either corporations or put people out of work. And so I think that if we take that and compare it, say, to increases in GAS, OAS, which are certainly beneficial and we look forward to, those numbers are in the range of $300 million. So there's a question of scale there. I think in terms of inequality generally in Canada, as you say, we have seen increasing inequalities now reaching the level that we've seen in the 1930s, with the richest 1% or 10% taking home much larger portions of the national income than they used to. And the problem for that is the result of that, rather, is stagnating incomes for the middle class and for lower income Canadians.
So can you just repeat that, just so we all understand? The clock has been turned back to the 1930s, the Great Depression, in terms of income inequality now in the country.
That's right, and in terms of personal taxation, interestingly. So the personal tax rate for someone living in Ontario, for instance, is now about the same as it was in the 1930s. So, and so the downside of having this kind of concentration of wealth at the top is that everybody doesn't participate in economic growth. So we see GDP go up. That should be good for everyone, but the problem is it's not necessarily good for everyone. It's definitely good for wealthier Canadians, but it's not necessarily good for middle-class Canadians who haven't seen their incomes go up in about 3 decades. And of course, it also drags down economic growth because you don't see middle-class Canadians going out and buying cars and buying TVs and so on. And so I think that in terms of the budget bill, I mean, there's small steps that can be taken. One of the things that I suggested was a new income tax bracket at the higher end that would put us part of the way back away from the low rates of the 1930s and today. And so I think that's part of it. The growing debt load on Canadians, which has likely reached somewhere around its peak, is stable in the short term as long as interest rates don't go up. But once they do, then we've got a very serious problem in terms of economic growth because consumers are debt poor. And so in that instance, I'm not sure that this budget can address that in particular, but I think that better expenditures on social programs, for instance, do support middle-class Canadians and lower-income Canadians. They're more likely to take advantage of those services.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Just a short question. Mr. McDonald, I'm interested. You mentioned that the gap is spreading from the rich, and I guess you said the middle class. What's the cutoff point? What salary would you say would be the cutoff point?
Well, it's a gradient, and so I think that if you took the top, so it gets worse as you get higher up, right? So the top 0.1% or 1% is gaining a larger portion of the income than they did 10 or 20 years ago. And so the cutoff point is probably around the top 30%. They have actually seen incomes increase over the past 30 years. Once you get below that point, you see real incomes stagnate. So
what about 150,000, 155? Would you consider that?
That'd be in the top 10%, definitely. The cutoff for the 10%, that's what you're asking for. The cutoff for the top 10% of income earners in Canada is about $110,000.
I just wanted that clarified because in the House today, Jean Crowder said that she included herself in that group that was being cut off. So you don't really agree with that? Analysis.
So, say that again?
An MP wouldn't be considered in that analysis.
An MP would definitely be in the top 10% of income earners in Canada,
okay,
yes.
You just needed to get that straightened out with your colleague. That's the only question I had, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we've exhausted our questions tonight. I want to thank our witnesses again for coming in, especially on short notice and at night. We appreciate your information. If any of you have any information you want us to consider tomorrow, please do provide that to us, and we will do so. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.